What if I told you that the towering cathedrals scattered across Europe were never meant for human hands? That they were not designed, measured, or built by the people we are told created them? At first, it sounds like fantasy, the sort of late night theory that drifts too far from the realm of reason. Yet tonight, we will peel back the layers of history, and what you will see cannot be unseen. Because the more one studies these ancient monuments, the clearer it becomes. Something about their origin does not belong to us. Our story begins, as it always should, with observation. Stand before the Cathedral of Chartres in France. Gaze up at its impossible spires. The stone seems alive, growing rather than constructed, each arch spiraling upward with organic precision. The carvings are so intricate that even under magnification, one finds details invisible to the naked eye. Folds of robes, veins in leaves, the curve of a smile etched into cold limestone. Official history tells us construction began around the year 1194 and finished in less than 70 years. But imagine for a moment what that means. In an age before cranes, before reinforced scaffolding, before any standardized system of measurement, tens of thousands of tons of stone were lifted, aligned, and locked into perfect harmony. How? Every modern architect who studies these buildings admits a strange disquiet. The geometry is flawless, to a degree difficult to reproduce even with lasers and CAD software. The acoustics inside are tuned to frequencies that amplify the human voice and music alike, as if the builders knew the mathematics of sound long before the science of acoustics existed. The stained glass, saturated with colors that never fade, uses chemical formulas lost to time. And the layout. The ratios between height and width, nave and transept, follows a mathematical language that mirrors the proportions of the human body, planetary orbits, and even electromagnetic resonance. How could medieval masons, working by candlelight and counting with fingers, possess such cosmic precision? Perhaps the question is wrong. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they inherited. When we trace the origins of these cathedrals, a pattern of silence appears. No blueprints survive. No sketches of initial designs. No training manuals describing how to cut the stone to such thin tolerances. In some cases, the supposed architects emerge from nowhere, their biographies empty of childhood, apprenticeship, or lineage. They design miracles, then vanish into history's fog. These phantom builders appear and disappear like ghosts, attached to the very stones. And everywhere we look, the story repeats. A humble wooden chapel burns down, always in a mysterious fire, and suddenly, within a few short years, an enormous stone cathedral rises from the ashes, more advanced than anything before or since. The fire erases the past, and the new structure rewrites it. Too convenient, too consistent to be coincidence. Let us follow one of these stories to its source. In the heart of Germany stands Cologne Cathedral, a forest of spires that pierce the sky. The official records claim construction began in 1248, halted for centuries, and resumed in the 19th century. Yet every measurement between the early and late phases aligns with uncanny accuracy, as if the later builders were following a plan more perfect than their own instruments could read. How did medieval surveyors maintain tolerances of a few millimeters across such vast heights and spans? The tools of the time, wooden rulers, weighted strings, primitive compasses, could not achieve that precision even on small projects. Something else guided the design, something outside our documented capability. There are clues hidden in the material itself. Geologists examining certain cathedrals find signs of advanced stone treatment, heating, fusing, or even reconstituting limestone into denser composites. Some walls show microscopic vitrification, as though exposed to intense energy capable of melting stone without destroying it. This is not primitive quarry work. This is controlled transformation, the kind that modern engineers achieve only with plasma or laser sintering. And yet it's there, embedded in buildings dated to the 13th century. If you listen closely inside these cathedrals, another phenomenon emerges. The air hums. Standing at the center of the nave, one feels subtle vibrations, as though the building itself resonates with a frequency tuned to human consciousness. The patterns of columns and arches mirror the geometry of cymatic resonance, the same shapes that sound waves carve into sand. Could it be that these structures were not merely places of worship, but instruments, vast harmonic devices designed to amplify and transform sound, energy, perhaps even life itself? Official explanations crumble under scrutiny. We are told these cathedrals were built by guilds of stonemasons and laborers working over generations. Yet, no records describe the housing, feeding, or payment of such massive workforces. No remnants of worker settlements, no quarries of the scale required to supply millions of tons of stone. It's as if the buildings appeared whole, immaculate, their origin hidden behind a wall of convenient mythology. And then there's the timeline problem. Historians insist Europe was emerging from the so-called Dark Ages, a period when literacy was rare, famine widespread, and population sparse. By their own numbers, entire nations contained fewer people than a modern city. So who, exactly, was left to build these stone leviathans? Who could have organized the logistics, managed the engineering, and sustained the labor for decades? The arithmetic simply doesn't add up. The closer you look, the more the story unravels. Imagine stripping away the centuries of dust and revision. Imagine seeing these cathedrals not as medieval triumphs, but as artifacts of a civilization erased. A culture whose understanding of physics, vibration, and sacred geometry surpassed ours in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. Perhaps that civilization did not vanish entirely. Perhaps traces of its knowledge survived, scattered among myths of angels and divine architects, whispered by monks who no longer understood what they were preserving. If that sounds impossible, consider this. Throughout the world, from the temples of India to the pyramids of Egypt to the basilicas of Europe, we find the same recurring motifs, the same star maps etched in stone, the same proportions linking earth to sky. Different continents, same code. Did a network of forgotten builders once span the globe, leaving behind structures that hum with the same harmonic signature? Or were these cathedrals the local echoes of a technology humanity has since lost? The more we ask, the deeper the abyss becomes. The stones do not answer, but they remember. And somewhere within that memory lies a truth too large for the textbooks, too dangerous for the footnotes of history. Tomorrow, we will follow the numbers. And when mathematics joins the investigation, the myth of human construction begins to crumble. Mathematics, after all, has no agenda. It does not bend to faith or to narrative. It simply describes what is possible and what is not. And when we apply mathematics to the story of the cathedrals, the numbers refuse to obey history. Let's begin with the simplest question of all. How many hands would it take to build one? A typical Gothic cathedral contains between 30 and 50,000 tons of precisely cut stone. Even assuming small blocks, it would require millions of separate lifts, alignments, and placements. If we estimate a workforce of 1,000 laborers working every single day for 80 years, with no interruptions, each person would still need to quarry, shape, and move nearly 2 tons of stone every week, by hand, with no machines. That's already beyond reason. But when we examine the recorded population densities of Europe during the 13th century, the impossibility becomes staggering. Entire towns contained fewer than 1,000 people. Cities like Reims or Chartres were barely more than large villages surrounded by farmland. To dedicate such a proportion of the population exclusively to one project would have starved the region. There would have been no one left to grow food, no one to fight wars, no one to maintain trade. And yet, the chronicles speak of thriving communities coexisting with these grand constructions, as if labor appeared from nowhere, an invisible workforce summoned from the ether. Historians might argue that labor was imported, that neighboring villages contributed workers, that generations passed their chisels from father to son. But even if we stretch the imagination to its limits, the manpower still collapses under basic arithmetic. The logistics of feeding, housing, and coordinating tens of thousands of workers without modern infrastructure is unrecorded, unsupported, and mathematically impossible. Not a single contemporary document mentions the endless caravans of food, the rivers of water, or the mountains of waste that such a workforce would have produced. The silence is louder than any archive. There's another kind of silence, too, the technological one. To lift stones weighing several tons more than 100 feet into the air, one needs cranes, pulleys, scaffolding of immense stability. Yet no physical remnants of these tools exist. The diagrams that do survive are almost ceremonial, decorative sketches with no mechanical feasibility. A wooden crane of the kind they describe could not hoist even a fraction of the weight required. The ropes would have snapped. The scaffolds would have buckled. The margins of error would have been catastrophic. And yet the cathedrals stand, unchanged for centuries, each stone resting in perfect equilibrium. Modern engineers, attempting to recreate sections of Gothic vaults using only the tools of the period, have repeatedly failed. The cuts are too clean, the symmetry too precise. In some cases, computer simulations reveal tolerances within millimeters, precision that industrial machinery only achieved in the 19th century. So where, then, did this knowledge come from? Did the Masons intuit physics that would not be formalized until Newton and Galileo? Or are we witnessing the survival of a blueprint from an age far older than the one recorded? Consider this: the same geometric ratios appear in cathedrals across continents. The ratio between the height of the nave and the width of the transept echoes the ratio of Earth's circumference to its polar radius. The spacing of the pillars often mirrors orbital relationships between planets. These are not coincidences, they are signatures. The builders encoded cosmic mathematics into architecture, knowledge supposedly beyond the reach of the 13th century. Unless, of course, the people of that era were not the designers at all, only the inheritors of ruins they didn't fully understand. This hypothesis gains strength when we observe the weathering of the oldest stones. Many cathedrals show erosion patterns inconsistent with their recorded age. Rounded edges, smoothed reliefs, waterwear that suggests centuries more exposure than history allows. In some crypts, the foundation stones appear significantly older than the upper layers, as if the builders merely extended or restored something already ancient. Even the orientation of some cathedrals predates the Christian calendar. They align not with Jerusalem or local geography, but with solstices, lunar nodes, or constellations no longer visible from their coordinates. Whoever laid those foundations was measuring the heavens, not marking Christian time. And then there is the resonance. Engineers who have tested the internal acoustics of these structures find frequencies that correspond to brainwave ranges, specifically the theta state, associated with meditation and altered consciousness. When choirs sing within these walls, sound waves reflect in such a way that the air itself becomes a medium of vibration, wrapping the listener in oscillating patterns that seem to slow thought. The builders did not simply aim for beauty. They engineered an environment that interacts with human perception, manipulating consciousness through sound. Could these cathedrals have once been devices, not temples of faith, but instruments of awakening, designed by a civilization fluent in the language of frequency and form? There are scattered clues suggesting exactly that. Carvings of tuning forks, resonant bells, and geometric flowers appear in unexpected places. Spiral motifs etched into stone match modern cymatic patterns produced by sound frequencies. And always the same symbols repeat: the fleur-de-lis, the rose, the star, icons of vibration, energy, and cycles. It's as if the builders were leaving behind a manual written in stone rather than ink, for those who might one day remember how to read it. And yet, official history insists these were the work of medieval Christians with crude tools and unquestioning faith. We are told to imagine peasants carving divinely inspired angels between harvests and famine, shaping miles of limestone with iron chisels that dulled after every stroke. The fantasy becomes theater. No matter how earnestly repeated, it does not withstand analysis. The logistics are unsustainable, the mathematics untenable, the physics impossible. So we return to the question that has haunted this investigation from the start. If not them, then who? Who designed buildings that defy both their era and ours? Who possessed the knowledge to tune matter to resonance, to shape stone into memory, to encode geometry that whispers of stars and frequencies? Perhaps these architects were not gods, not spirits, but survivors, remnants of a civilization that fell before recorded time, a culture whose technology was not mechanical but harmonic, whose machines were made of vibration rather than metal. Somewhere along the line, catastrophe intervened. The survivors, those who wandered among the ruins, could no longer rebuild, only repurpose. They took shelter in what remained, assigning new meanings to incomprehensible spaces. They called them churches, sanctuaries, cathedrals. They filled them with rituals to mimic the resonance they no longer understood. And slowly, as generations passed, the true purpose of these structures faded into legend. But the stones remain, humming quietly, waiting for recognition. If we listen long enough, we might still hear the echo of the builders. Not human, not divine, but something in between. Tomorrow, we follow their trail beyond Europe, where the same fingerprints appear again and again on the far side of the world. When we extend our search beyond the familiar borders of Europe, the pattern does not dissolve, it multiplies. The same architectural fingerprints reappear in places separated by oceans and centuries, as if an invisible hand once drew blueprints across the entire planet. In Cambodia's Angkor Wat, the same ratios of width to height found in Chartres emerge again, hidden in sandstone. The ancient temples of India, the mosques of Central Asia, and even the pre-Columbian ruins of the Andes share symmetrical geometries that match the cathedrals of Paris and Cologne. Columns echo columns, domes mirror domes, and resonant chambers align to identical frequencies. How could cultures with no known contact share the same mathematical language? This mystery grows stranger still when we examine the chronology. Historians claim that many of these sites predate European cathedrals by thousands of years, and yet their design feels more like continuation than origin, as if the same invisible civilization built both, adapting its art to local materials but keeping the same harmonic code. The human story becomes increasingly implausible. We are told that the builders of Angkor carved millions of sandstone blocks with hand tools, transported them through swamps, and assembled them without wheels. We are told that the Inca fit stones weighing hundreds of tons with such precision that not even a blade of grass can slide between them, without iron, without mortar, without machines. And we are told that medieval Europeans, barely literate and battling plague, suddenly rediscovered the same perfection in stone that entire continents had achieved millennia earlier. Either genius strikes humanity in perfect synchrony across thousands of miles, or there is another explanation, one too vast to fit inside our history books. If these buildings belong to a single architectural family, then their builders shared more than mathematics. They shared memory, a memory of vibration, of geometry, of energy as a living force. Consider the great rose windows that adorn cathedrals from Notre Dame to Milan. Their circular symmetry, radiating from a central point, is identical to mandalas from Tibet and yantras from India. Both represent the same principle: energy spiraling from stillness, the movement of creation itself. How could the same sacred geometry arise in isolation unless it stemmed from one root system, one ancient science of form and frequency? Some researchers have begun to call this forgotten science the architecture of resonance. The theory suggests that certain proportions and materials can tune structures to specific vibrational frequencies, amplifying energy in ways we barely understand. When sound waves travel through stone at harmonic intervals, they create standing waves, invisible patterns that can influence light, magnetism, even consciousness. This is no longer speculation. Modern experiments in resonance show that frequencies around 110 Hz, precisely the resonant frequency of many cathedral naves, induce a mild trance in the human brain. The ancients knew this. They built temples to hum at those same notes. They shaped stone to sing. What, then, if cathedrals are not monuments to faith, but remnants of a lost technology, one that used vibration instead of electricity, geometry instead of circuitry, and consciousness instead of computation? A civilization that encoded its science into stone so that, even if its people vanished, its knowledge would remain intact, humming quietly across the ages. Everywhere we look, we find signs that these cathedrals were not designed to house congregations, but to interact with the earth itself. Many stand precisely over geologic fault lines, where electromagnetic fields are strongest. Some align with the nodes of what geomancers call ley lines, invisible channels of planetary energy connecting ancient sites like dots in a cosmic circuit. Even their shapes resemble antennas, spires reaching into the sky, grounding lines plunging deep into the earth. They were not merely built to honor heaven, but to bridge it. And perhaps that is why, wherever one of these structures stood, myths of divine intervention followed. In France, villagers told stories of angels finishing the work at night. In Germany, they spoke of stones that moved by themselves, floating gently into place. In England, legends of giants building churches before dawn echo through local folklore. To modern ears, these tales sound like fantasy. But what if they are distorted memories? faint recollections of forces and tools beyond our comprehension, recorded in the only language people had left. Myth? When the great cathedrals were rediscovered in the 19th century, after centuries of neglect and ruin, many explorers remarked that they looked far older than their supposed age. Some were half buried in earth, their lower windows filled with soil, as if the ground had risen since their construction. Others bore scorch marks on interior stones, as though they had survived an immense heat, a global fire that melted history itself. These are not signs of age alone. They are signatures of catastrophe. Perhaps this is the missing link. The builders, whoever they were, did not disappear gradually. They were erased suddenly, violently, in an event that reshaped the planet. What followed was not a renaissance, but a recovery. The survivors wandered through a broken world, finding these indestructible relics and assigning them new stories, new gods, new meanings, the same way a child might find an abandoned machine and mistake it for an altar. Look closely at the carvings on cathedral walls, and you'll see strange details that no historian can explain. Figures holding globes or spheres, creatures half mechanical, half biological, instruments that resemble tuning devices or coils. These are not symbols of medieval devotion, they are remnants of knowledge, and they appear with eerie consistency in ancient structures worldwide. The hand that carved them might not have been human at all, at least, not human in the way we define ourselves today. The question now is not simply who built them, but when. If these cathedrals predate recorded history, then our timeline is off by millennia. The evidence points to a global event that fractured civilization, resetting humanity's memory. Imagine a vast cataclysm, a cosmic impact, a shift in polarity, a technological implosion, something so devastating that it erased almost everything. In the aftermath, humanity awoke in ruins, surrounded by relics too advanced to replicate, too sacred to destroy. And so, we worshipped them. Perhaps the first churches were not built as places of prayer, but as acts of reverence towards structures that pre-existed us. Humanity looked upon these ruins and saw the divine. We gave them names, stories, saints. We claimed ownership of a legacy that wasn't ours because we could not admit the alternative, that we were children walking among the monuments of gods. Today, when we look at these cathedrals, we still feel that same awe, but we misinterpret it. We think it's faith. In truth, it may be recognition. Somewhere deep within, we sense that the builders were not strangers. They were our predecessors, our ancestors, or perhaps our creators. And as the evidence mounts, the impossible geometry, the perfect resonance, the planetary alignments, the official version of history grows thin, like a painting stretched too far over an empty frame. Beneath it lies another picture, older, darker, more magnificent. Tomorrow, we will take that frame apart completely. We will turn to the last refuge of the skeptic, the numbers, and they will tell us a truth far more disturbing than myth ever could. So let us do what few have dared. Bring mathematics into the sanctuary. Because belief can be rewritten, but numbers do not forgive. They expose the limits of what is possible, and when we hold them up to the light of the cathedrals, history begins to disintegrate. We start with population, the pulse of civilization. Official records claim that by the early 13th century, when most of Europe's great cathedrals were supposedly rising, the continent held around 70 million people. Yet, even these figures are guesses, stitched together from fragmentary tax rolls and inconsistent chronicles. Many historians quietly admit that the data is symbolic, not empirical, a reconstruction rather than a record. But let's be generous. Let's take their highest estimates. Even then, the math collapses. If a single cathedral required, say, 20,000 workers over the course of 80 years, then constructing the roughly 200 Gothic cathedrals scattered across Europe would have demanded millions of laborers. And not just for a few months, but for generations. That means 1 in every 3 adults would have been working full-time as stonemasons, quarrymen, carters, and architects. An absurdity. Fields would have withered, armies would have vanished, trade would have ceased, civilization would have consumed itself. And yet, the opposite occurred. The same centuries that birthed these impossible structures also birthed universities, trade guilds, entire monarchies. The math tells a different story. The deeper we push these calculations, the more grotesque the distortion becomes. Even if we imagine fewer cathedrals, even if we compress the numbers to the point of denial, the ratios remain impossible. At the rate of technological development historians assign to that period, building just one of these giants should have taken several hundred years. Yet they sprouted in clusters, as if responding to some invisible timetable. No society so limited in manpower and resources could have sustained such synchronized miracles. Unless, of course, they were not building them. They were uncovering them. That hypothesis, once radical, now explains everything the numbers cannot. The absence of construction records, the missing blueprints, the sudden appearance of multiple master architects whose lifespans stretch across centuries. The identical proportions repeating across countries that had never shared design correspondence. The speed of so-called construction, too fast for manual labor, too slow for discovery, perfect only if one assumes repair, excavation, and adaptation of pre-existing structures. When mathematicians apply population regression models, reversing modern growth rates to estimate historical population, they encounter a singularity. Go far enough back, and the curve doesn't fade gently to small numbers. It collapses entirely. By the 12th or 13th century, according to these equations, the global population should have been in the tens of thousands, not millions. A few scattered towns, not empires. At that point, the idea of a Europe dense with cathedrals becomes absurd. If only a fraction of humanity existed, who carved the mountains of stone? Who sustained the impossible logistics? To dismiss the mathematics, historians claim that early population growth was non-linear, subject to plagues and recoveries. But even that fails under scrutiny. The Black Death of the 14th century supposedly killed 1/3 of Europe's population. Yet, a century later, cathedrals were still being built at full scale. The plague that decimated society somehow spared the Masons. How? Numbers do not care for excuses. They demand consistency, and our history offers none. And so we are forced toward a darker conclusion, that our timeline is not linear at all, that it breaks catastrophically, repeatedly. Something erased the past, reset the count, and left only fragments behind. The population surge of the last 2 centuries is not continuity. It is recovery, a sudden bloom after near extinction, which means that before the Renaissance, before the Middle Ages, there may have been nothing, or rather, someone else. Evidence of this fracture lingers not only in numbers, but in architecture itself. Beneath many cathedrals lie older foundations, massive stones that predate the supposed start of construction by hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. At Chartres, excavations revealed levels of construction below the Gothic crypt, cut with precision no medieval tool could match. In Reims, the lower strata show signs of vitrification, as though scorched by immense heat. In Paris, beneath Notre Dame, archaeologists discovered remnants of an earlier structure aligned not to Christian symbolism, but to the path of the sun at solstice. We are staring at the fossilized bones of an older world, a civilization burned out of memory. Imagine for a moment that such a civilization existed, global, technologically advanced, not through machinery, but through mastery of natural forces. They understood geometry not as theory, but as language, resonance not as art, but as power. When their world ended, its survivors inherited ruins too vast to replicate, too sacred to abandon. They renamed them, repurposed them, called them churches, temples, castles. They filled them with new myths to conceal an unbearable truth, that they were tenants in a world they did not build. In this light, the so-called architects of the Gothic age become curators, not creators. They patched, restored, modified. They added spires and ornamentation to shells that predated them. The real genius belongs to the unseen hands that shaped the core, the harmonic skeletons of stone. And perhaps, without understanding why, medieval builders imitated what they saw. They copied proportions, replicated vaults, mimicked arches, but the underlying formula, the science that made them living instruments, was already lost. This hypothesis also explains why the style vanished so suddenly. The Gothic era, according to historians, lasted barely 2 centuries. Then, without warning, Europe abandoned it. Architects turned to simpler, flatter designs. The knowledge evaporated overnight. No manual, no school, no gradual decline. Just silence. The same silence that follows amnesia. We might laugh at these suppositions until we notice that the same vanishing act happens across the planet. In Egypt, the knowledge that raised pyramids disappeared in a single generation. In South America, stone-cutting technology vanished between one culture and the next. In Asia, the colossal temples of Angkor and Borobudur ceased to have builders at all. Civilizations emerge from ruins already old, and we mistake inheritance for invention. So when the numbers tell us that the population of the 13th century could not have built the cathedrals, perhaps we should listen. Perhaps we should accept the heresy that mathematics reveals, that humanity, as we know it, is far younger than we believe, born not in progress, but in recovery. But even that explanation leaves one more problem unsolved: the origin of the knowledge itself. Because even if a forgotten civilization once mastered these forces, where did they learn it? The geometry of the cathedrals does not stop at Earth. It maps celestial mechanics, ratios matching planetary orbits, stellar distances, gravitational harmonics. These are constants that require observation from a scale far beyond ground level. Who first measured the heavens with such precision? Who encoded it into stone? Perhaps the builders were not simply older. Perhaps they were not entirely human. Tomorrow, we will turn to the evidence buried not in myth or masonry, but in light itself. There, within the forgotten photographs of the 19th century, we may glimpse what the builders left behind, and what humanity stumbled upon long after they were gone. Light has a memory, and in the earliest photographs ever taken of Europe's cathedrals, something impossible lingers within it. The images date to the mid-1800s, long before restoration, long before tourist floods and electric lamps. They show what the naked eye could never see: a world half buried, half asleep. Many of the cathedrals appear sunken into the earth, their doors level with the ground as if swallowed by time. Others rise out of desolation, surrounded by empty streets, skeletal trees, and a strange absence of life. No cranes, no scaffolds, no evidence of active building. They were already ancient. The people captured beside them looked like intruders, dressed in simple coats and hats, dwarfed by walls that tower like geological formations. In some of these daguerreotypes, light bends unnaturally across the stone. The spires glow faintly even under clouded skies. Early photographers called it a silver anomaly, a trick of exposure. But the same glow repeats across dozens of plates from different countries. When analyzed today, the phenomenon defies explanation. The material seems to emit light rather than reflect it. Could it be that these stones still carry a charge from whatever process first shaped them, like the residue of a technology that once harnessed the Earth's magnetic field? Hidden among these photographs are other clues. In one image of Rams from 1851, a large archway at the cathedral's side reveals an interior chamber now sealed by later construction. Within that arch, faint geometric etchings line the walls. Hexagons nested within circles, the same harmonic patterns we've traced from temple to temple. In another image, taken in Chartres around 1860, a section of the façade appears partially melted, its statues fused together in flowing shapes, as though exposed to immense heat. Yet, the surrounding stones remain untouched. This is not weathering. It is selective transformation, evidence of a process powerful enough to alter molecular structure without destroying the whole. We begin to glimpse the magnitude of what might have happened. Imagine an event capable of scorching continents, of altering matter itself, of erasing an entire civilization's infrastructure, yet leaving its monument standing, petrified music frozen mid-chord. That event, whatever it was, marked the true dawn of our recorded history. Everything before it was wiped clean. Everything after it was interpretation. The world we call medieval was not the birth of civilization, but its aftermath. As the 19th century progressed, something curious occurred. Restoration projects began simultaneously across Europe, sponsored by monarchs and churches alike. It was as though an unspoken order had been given. Cover the cracks, replace the missing statues, rewrite the inscriptions. The past was being polished into conformity. Stone that once bore the scars of fire and fusion was scraped and recarved. Stained glass windows depicting celestial diagrams were replaced with biblical scenes. The cathedrals were sanitized, made to fit the narrative of human authorship. The few who questioned this process were dismissed as romantics or mystics. But some left records, brief, haunted notes, describing things they had seen before the restoration teams arrived. One French surveyor wrote of passages that go down beyond reckoning, carved from a stone older than the upper walls. Another described iron fixtures embedded deep within the foundation, not wrought by hammer, but grown into the rock as if born there. A photographer in Milan claimed that during long exposures at night, faint shapes appeared within the glass plates, geometric lattices surrounding the spires, visible only under silver light. Whether hallucination or artifact, these testimonies converge on one idea, that the cathedrals are not inert structures. They are dormant machines. If so, then their builders were not merely architects, but engineers of resonance and light. They understood how to focus electromagnetic currents through geometry, how to channel energy from the Earth's core to the atmosphere. Every tower, every bell, every curve plays a role in the circuit. The great rose windows, with their radial symmetry and colored filters, might once have functioned as lenses, splitting sunlight into frequencies that interacted with the stone's crystalline lattice. The bells themselves cast to precise tonal ratios, could have acted as triggers, activating resonance fields when struck. Together, these elements formed an orchestra of vibration, harmonizing matter and consciousness in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. If this sounds fantastical, remember that modern science has only begun to understand the relationship between vibration and form. We know that frequencies can levitate small objects, can change molecular alignment, can influence the growth of living tissue. The ancient builders may have known how to extend this principle to unimaginable scales. Perhaps they could lift stones with sound, shape them with resonance, bind them with frequency instead of mortar. The notion of levitating stones becomes less absurd when one remembers that matter itself is vibration, that every atom dances to an inaudible rhythm. The cathedrals, then, are not miracles. They are physics written in stone. So, what happened to the knowledge? The simplest answer is also the bleakest. It was not forgotten. It was forbidden. After the cataclysm, when a handful of survivors began rebuilding, the resonant structures they inherited may have still been functional. Their vibrations could have influenced the mind, induced visions, altered memory. To stabilize a terrified population, new rulers may have sealed the frequencies behind ritual and religion. They rebranded technology as faith, engineers as priests, sound as prayer. The hum of the cathedrals became hymns. The knowledge was buried under theology, encoded in metaphor, until even the metaphors turned to myth. But sometimes the old energy stirs. When storms roll across Europe and lightning strikes a spire, strange phenomena occur. Instruments record electromagnetic pulses stronger than any other structure produces. Windows hum, compasses spin, air thickens with static. Pilgrims report moments of timelessness, euphoria, visions of light. Dismissed as spiritual ecstasy, these might be residual reactions of a living machine momentarily awakened by nature's touch. The cathedral remembers what it was built to do, if only for seconds. All across the world, similar relics react the same way. The pyramids of Giza resonate during earthquakes. The temples of Angkor hum under heavy rain. The megaliths of South America produce magnetic anomalies measurable by modern instruments. It's as if the planet itself once thrummed with a network of harmonic stations. And the cathedrals are the last still standing, their frequencies faint but unbroken. What does this mean for us? Perhaps that human civilization is not a linear ascent from ignorance to knowledge, but a cycle, rise, perfection, cataclysm, amnesia, rediscovery. The cathedrals mark the midpoint between two worlds, one that mastered resonance and another that forgot it. We stand in the second, mistaking echoes for origins. The final question is the one we are least prepared to ask. If these structures were not built by us, then where did their designers go? Did they perish in the cataclysm, or did they leave, having completed their purpose? Some legends whisper that the builders departed through light itself, that the spires of the great cathedrals were once gates, tuned to frequencies that bridged dimensions. When the resonance fell silent, the gates closed, sealing the old world away. And now, centuries later, we wander through their empty corridors, tracing patterns we no longer comprehend, calling them sacred. Maybe that instinct, the awe we feel under vaulted ceilings, the shiver at the echo of a choir, is not worship, but recognition, a genetic memory awakening. The stones hum, and something ancient inside us hums back. Mathematics stripped away the illusion of human authorship. Light has revealed the residue of another technology. The only thing left is to decide what story we believe. Either we accept the comfortable fiction that peasants with chisels outperformed modern engineers, or we acknowledge the possibility that history, as written, is a reconstruction, an edited chronicle built upon ruins of a civilization erased. The cathedrals stand as monuments to that silence. They are not just architecture, they are witnesses to a world that fell, to a memory that refuses to die, to builders whose hands no longer touch the earth, but whose design still shapes our skies. This investigation, like the hum in the stones, is far from over. The truth is not buried in the past. It waits, vibrating softly in every echo, every beam of light that strikes those ancient walls. The question is whether we have the courage to listen,